your actions have consequences. Now, this is a phrase I would argue all of you have heard at least at some point during your life. And a common way we describe this idea is with something called the ripple effect. The idea of taking a small stone and throwing it into a lake, and the ripple cascades out from it, causing the entire lake to behave differently from the way it was before. Now, take that pebble and replace it with a decision. It could be the actions you take to get to school, or the way you talk to your friend one day. All of these actions have an effect that cascades out and changes the lake you live in. Hello, my name is Caleb Bates, and for my senior thesis, I decided to look into adolescent decision making and see how that affects adolescent behavior. My research question for this topic was, what connections can we make between the results of the Stanford Prison Experiment and adolescent behavior? Now, you're probably wondering, what is the Stanford Prison Experiment? The Stanford Prison Experiment was a psychological experiment performed in 1971 by a man named Philip Zimbardo. Now, back during the late 1900s, many people across the world had a belief, this idea that good people are born good and can only ever do good things, while bad people are born bad and will only ever do bad things. Philip Zimbardo theorized that this was not true, that every human is capable of both good and bad behavior, and the Stanford Prison Experiment was a way to test this. For this experiment, he built a makeshift prison in the basement of the Stanford University building. He then brought in a bunch of different college students and randomly assigned them to the roles of prisoners and guards. The experiment lasted a course of 6 days, and over the course of it, there was many different results that came from the idea of having the guards control this prison where the prisoners were living. And in the end, there was this big fight that happened between the prisoners and guards on day 6, which caused the entire experiment to end up getting canceled. Now, even though it was canceled, we did happen to learn a couple of two major lessons from it. The first of which being dehumanization. Now, dehumanization is a concept that refers to the idea of taking away someone's humanity. Now, there are multiple ways to do this, but the biggest and most notable way is making someone feel like they don't have a choice, making them feel that they don't have a decision to make in this overall situation that they are currently placed in, and that their actions aren't going to affect the rest of the world. Now, the second lesson we learned was de-individuation, the idea that when one is placed inside a larger group, they begin to lose their sense of personal identity. They begin to conform to the group norms. The way everyone else acts becomes the way they act. Now, the second half of my thesis talks about the idea of adolescent psychology. Now, adolescence is a very interesting time in one's life. It spans from the time of middle school all the way up, middle school, all the way up to college. And this is a very informative time in one's life. This is the time when they figure out who they want to be in the overall world. Do they want to go into this career field? What people are they interested in? And what person are they going to become and continue to be for the rest of their lifetime? It all starts right here, and this is where they figure it out. In turn, every action and every decision that they make during this time of their life is going to affect how they are for the rest of their life. So moving into that first lesson that I talked about, dehumanization. Now, dehumanization was first present in the Stanford Prison Experiment in the relationship that the prisoners had with the guards. Now, the relationship the two of them had was complicated, to say the least, as in this prison, the guards had all the power and the prisoners had very little. And the guards took advantage of this. Then Philip Zimbardo discovered that within 36 hours of the experiment starting, the guards were found to taunt the prisoners. They would keep them up at late hours of the night by taking their batons and would run them across the bars of the prison, keeping them awake for late hours of the night, denying them a human necessity, sleep. And the World Health Organization describes sleep deprivation as a very serious thing, as the human brain can only function for a limited number of time before it has to recharge. And if it can't get that recharge, the brain will begin to act differently and can give you thoughts of depression and even suicide. And this was a thing that led into the prisoners. They were tired, they were feeling mistreated, and they wanted a way out. And their way out was to lash out against the guards, as the guards were the one putting them through this pain, so they had to go against that. And this was not that initial 6-day fight that I mentioned that ended the entire experiment. This was an earlier fight that happened on day 3. And this resulted as well in the guards using their batons that they had on their belts. And these batons were specifically mentioned to be not used at all. Philip Zimbardo in the orientation made it very clear these were not meant to be used. They were just for show, and you were supposed to have them on your belts at all times just to help create the illusion. But they actually used them to beat the prisoners if they weren't conforming to the rules the prison had set, and even using them in those initial fights. And even though this was heavily frowned upon, the taunting was also heavily frowned upon. The guards keeping them up at late hours, taunting them on hours of the day. And in fact, Philip Zimbardo discovered that when this was happening was at late hours of the night when the guards thought nobody was watching them. So how does this connect back to adolescence? Character traits are a concept that we commonly use to associate and define people's personalities. There are positive traits such as respect, courage, and compassion, and there are negative traits such as aggression, arrogance, and greed. These traits can go to define someone's personality, and to help confirm these traits exist, there were 2 experiments that were done in 2014. The first was conducted by a man named Van Noorden. He took a bunch of Dutch elementary school children and asked them individually what character traits they would associate with people in their class. The common data they found was that the positive traits were associated with people that they were commonly friends with, people they hung out with every day, while the negative traits were commonly associated with people that they either didn't talk to a lot or people that had actively gone against them. Similarly, later that year, 2 researchers by the name of Costello and Hodson conducted a similar experiment on American children, and it yielded roughly the same results. So, if this is happening with elementary school children, it's not out of the realm of possibility to believe this is happening with high school children or adolescents. They could bring these traits up and go against people in their grades. Now, bullying, a constant definition for it across multiple dictionaries, is that it's an event of aggression and sometimes going against people, but it happens not once but multiple times. Now, bringing up these traits multiple times can have an effect on someone, as identity development goes against this idea that identity is how you see yourself and how others see you. So if others see you a certain way, you might begin to adopt that personality because that's just how you believe you are. So if someone keeps coming up to you every single day and giving you these negative traits, it's possible you might adopt these traits, or on the flip side, you won't adopt them and you'll lash out at this person because they're misidentifying you. And this leads kind of into the connection between the two, as when your identity and personality are questioned, and it makes you feel like you don't have a choice in the world because someone else is making the choice for you for your personality, you might go against that, try to lash out at the person, or try any way to get that personality back, which can lead to negative experiences. And in turn, another connection is that, like I mentioned with the guards, they were constantly found to do the taunting at late hours of the night. And what is the common times when adolescents would bully someone? When there are no adults in the room to give them a consequence for their actions. Now, moving into the second lesson is de-individuation. Now, this was present in the original experiment through the ideas of the guards. Now, Philip Zimbardo really wanted the prison to feel like the guards. They wanted the guards to control this prison with every possible aspect. To help with this idea, he actually brought them into the prison earlier. They actually helped him with the final construction of it. So they knew everything about the prison before the prisoners had even stepped foot in it. And they made it very clear that this was theirs. And even he allowed them to choose the outfits they would wear for the prison. The outfits being very traditional prison guard outfits with these blacked out shades. Making it, as I would say, very difficult to tell them apart, which leads into the other idea of the guards, a collective hive mind. This was something Philip Zimbardo wanted the guards to adopt, and this was something he specifically brought up in their initial orientation. The idea that you are all expected to act the exact same way. If one of you does something, you're all supposed to do it. So taking this into the experiment, one person taunts someone, everyone does it. Leading into this idea that everyone was doing it. And because it's hard to tell these people apart, when the prisoners were getting taunted at late hours of the night, they wanted to fight back against the guards, they didn't know which guard did it. They didn't know who to go after. So they just said, you're the fault of this, so we're going to go after you. But this wasn't always, and if one guard fought back, all the guards were expected to. This eventually led into not only the guards, but there also is examples of this within the prisoners. Specifically, a prisoner going by the number of 8612. Prisoner 8612 was actually someone who ended up getting extracted from the experiment entirely, as he began to have thoughts of suicide. He was not doing great in the experiment, and because Philip Zimbardo didn't want college students to, so he decided to extract him from the experiment in order to get him out. But then he later found multiple other prisoners were performing the exact same thing in an event to get the same result. And he later discovered, after researching a little more, that every prisoner had a diary. They all were given a diary in their cells that they were writing on during the course of the experiment. And he found that 8612 was somewhat of a leader to the prisoners, as during that initial third-day fight that I mentioned, he was one of the first who stood up against the guards. In turn, this meant that he was somewhat of a leader to them, and the fact that he got out of the prison for having these thoughts, others conformed to that idea, hoping for the same reward. So moving this into modern day adolescence, we mainly see this idea come through within the internet. The internet has had a massive rise over the last couple of years with things like social media and online gaming. Now, online gaming is a very interesting idea. The fact that lots of online games out there, most people, their faces are never seen and their voices are never heard. So there is very little chance that if a negative action happens on a video game, that the consequence is going to come back around onto that person, as it's very difficult to track me down for something I said when you don't know who I am on the internet. This leads to the idea why so many people on online games act very similar ways. Act very similarly, have saying the same things, playing the game the same way. It all relates into this idea that there's no consequence for their actions for things they say or do because, well, there's no way to hold them accountable. Because like the idea of this, if I'm online, I might say something to someone that I wouldn't normally say to them if I'm face to face. Because they can come after me if I say that online, they can't. This relates into this whole idea of this connection of that we conform to these idealistic groups. And in high schools, we also see this, where you'll have a friend group, the debate team, an athletic team. They begin to become friends, and in turn, they begin to act like each other. As their personalities and actions rub off on one another, they begin to act very similarly because they adopt a collective hive mind like the guards did. And in turn, if you don't conform to these group norms and that, you can end up getting excluded from the group. Now, this can actually have a negative impact on your identity, as an identity development comes from how you see yourself and how others see yourself. And if you don't have a friend group to help you build your identity, to figure out who you want to be in the overall world, then it could end up in your identity either taking a halt from developing, or it's going to develop very slowly, and in turn, you might get to the same result, but it's going to be very slow compared to the rest. So this moves into some of the conclusions I've made from these results. Is that good and bad behavior do exist. They are something that they're something that we just have to contend with, as in the environments we have like high schools and online, there's just going to be negative things that happen. There are negative experiences, and when when bad things happen to you, you're likely to cause bad behavior as a result. And when good things happen to you, you cause good things as a result. This is how we result in the idea of we have good people and bad people, but at the same time, we just have people that are doing both and can cause the same thing, ripple. And in turn, some applications for this knowledge to help better this idea is that we could just extend a hand. Like I mentioned, an identity forms from how people see you. If you find that someone is not super happy, you can extend a hand and help, as there are multiple resources for this idea of Safe to Tell here in Colorado, or just being a friend to someone. That can help them figure out what kind of person they are and allow them to grow into who they want to be. We can better monitor our online use, as with all the negative things we find on the internet, sometimes it's better just to walk away, to put down the phone, put down the game, and just walk away from the negative experience. You can even do that in school. And you can place yourself in positive environments, such as local organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, which builds a positive location that allow kids to go creatively and find out who they want to be in the overall world. So my final claim for all of you is that when in the next walk of life that you take after this presentation, if you find yourself in negative experiences, try to find the positive in those experiences. Don't let the negativity take over, and allow yourself to be positive so that you can cause positive outcomes in the rest of the world. Any questions?
All right. Thank you very much, Caleb.